In this video, I'll talk about a bunch of new techniques of knitting on Addi, somewhere around 7 or 9. It depends on how you count. In this technique, I make the machine do a mistake, which the machine sometimes makes itself. In the first row, I do tucked stitch at first, third, fifth, etc. on odd needles. In the second row, you need to do the same thing on the same needles if we go on circular row. If we make a flat panel, then on the edge needles the second time will not work. There we simply knit. And on the remaining odd ones, we repeat, collecting 3 threads in a loop. The third row is ordinary knitting, but you have to knit 3 threads in a loop at once, because they are accumulated on odd needles. From the fourth row, we repeat everything, but on the second, fourth, sixth needles. That is on even needles. In 2 rows we make tucked stitches. On the third row we rest doing ordinary stitches. Now I will show this on a small flat panel. The first needle I'll make a tucked stitch. The second needle I do ordinary stitch. On the third needle tucked stitch again. On the fourth ordinary. And tucked stitch every other needle. The second row, I can't make a tuck stitch on the edge needle, so I can make only usual knit. So one usual knit, the second usual knit. On the third tuck stitch, usual knit, tucked stitch, tucked stitch, and the third row is the usual row. And now I repeat everything, but I make tucked stitches on on every needle with even number. In the discussed technique, all rows are the same, and therefore a vertical pattern is formed. All lassos are knotted. Every lasso is done on one needle. You need to think about each 4 stitches as 2 pairs. In the first pair, both stitches are made the same way. The knots look forward in the direction of row movement, and they will go in columns at a normal distance from each other. The second pair is symmetrical, in which the knots look at each other. It matches the stitch columns that go closer. This will give lace with a rhythmic vertical pattern. For this technique, it's useful for at least the first time to put a mirror in the center of the machine. In the following rows, you do the same, in the sense that you keep the rows in pairs vertically. One pair is normal, and it is placed on the normal one, and the other with symmetrical stitches, which are built on symmetrical ones. On the very first needle, it is impossible to do the special stitch. Now I consider next 4 needles. On most needles, the knot is made towards knitting. To do this, a lasso is made on the needle from the master side, and then the lower thread is thrown over the needle, and we get a knot on the lasso. On one of the 4 needles, a knot is made in another direction, in the direction of movement of the machine, and for this you need to twist the thread on a crochet hook. You can twist in 2 directions. The correct one will be that which will give a stitch strictly symmetrical to the previous one. The base of the stitch is lasso 2, on which 1 or 2 squirrels are attached. These stitches do not like vertical location. I give you 1 pattern for 4 pines and 2 patterns for 3 pines. Take 4 needles in a row. Number them from 1 to 4. On the second and third needles we make a lasso 2. We have formed a breech. We pull the working thread under the breech and throw the resulting loom on the first needle. Move the machine on 2 needles and throw the second squirrel on the fourth one. You can make one squirrel only forward or backward from the lasso. So I make 3 pines with the squirrel forward. And now 3 pines with the backward squirrel stitch. This family is united by the fact that the yarn comes from the -1 level, that is from the holes near needles and delimiters, directly under last knitted row. This means that the yarn comes to the needles already in the form of a loop. But this description is not enough for a complete definition of the technique. There remain 4 degrees of freedom that allow you to create 72 patterns. These are such factors: where the yarn comes from, how many needles are involved in the stitch, how many needles are in the spotlight in one stitch, or as I say, what is the width of the slingshot, on which side the lasso is thrown on the needles, from inside or outside the machine, how many loops one needle gets. Here is a table of techniques that I will consider today, but someone smart enough can try all 72 variants. You should think about this technique as a deco in the framework of one row. Such rows can be arranged rhythmically. Let's say 2 rows accented, then 3 ordinary rows, then 1 accented row, 3 ordinary rows, and again accented 2 rows, and so on. If you make a flat panel, then knead the first needle with a regular stitch. If you make a tube, then the stitch on the first needle will come at the end of the row. The yarn goes from under the fabric. That is for a flat panel, I just move the skein down. And if you knit around, then you knit before the first needle, transfer a piece of yarn 3 times longer than the red circle of the machine, and raise and twist your work into this big loop. When you finish the row, do not forget to remove the excess yarn from under the fabric and repeat the operation for the next accented row. See where I hold my left hand. Stitches are done like this. I poke with a crochet hook in the first hole under the first needle and put the resulting loop on the second needle. Then I advance the machine by 1 needle, and so repeat until the end of the row. Initially, I opened the zigzags for the purl side, but recently I saw what it can be done for the front side. Work always with a pair of needles. For a panel with an odd number of needles, and for circular knitting, choose where we will make a regular stitch. For each line of zigzags, 4 rows are enough, but in the first line you need to do 1 more, 5 rows. If you want to make a drawing more Gothic, you can do more rows in 1 zigzag. But the first line of zigzags requires 1 row more than the rest, like an extra row for entry. The yarn goes from under the fabric, from the hole under the red separator, and the resulting loop is thrown on 2 adjacent needles. For the pattern on the purl side, a loop is thrown from inside the machine. For deco on the front side, the loop is pulled out and thrown from the master side. Craters are made similarly as zigzags, but the difference is that the yarn comes from the center of the machine. The hook crawls under the thread next with the separator. The resulting loop is thrown on two adjacent needles. For a drawing on the pearl side, the loop is thrown from inside of the machine. For the deck on the front side, the loop is thrown from the master side. I recommend this sequence of rows: 3 rows from under the fabric and 2 rows of ordinary ones. Ordinary rows do discharge the tight knitting and give a 3D wave. The yarn goes from under the fabric, from a hole under the separator. And is thrown on 2 adjacent needles. The machine is moving on one needle and everything repeats. It looks like zigzag technique, but in zigzags, each pair of needles is processed separately. Here pairs intersect, and the thread comes to the needle twice, from right and left. If you knit in a circle, then for each such a row, send yarn in and around the machine. It is done similarly to box, but the yarn comes from under the middle needle of 3 ones, and the slingshot goes to 2 adjacent needles. The middle needle does not knit. For circular knitting, everything closes in a circle, and for a flat panel, special care for 2 pairs of needles on the edge is necessary. The first needle 1 regular stitch from around the edge. From under the first needle, the stitch comes to the second needle. And further from under the second needle, the stitches on the first and third needles are done. Further, from under each needle, two on two adjacent ones. The previous and the next needles are operated, not current. On the first row, the yarn comes from the square round the needle. On the second row, from the triangle, which is pulled almost to zero. You need to expand it with a crochet hook, penetrate into it and pull out the thread. At the end of the row, you should do a stitch from under the last needle on the penultimate needle and regular stitch on the last one from around the edge.